Remember that, again, because of our definition of performance task, writing is a performance task. And one of the things we want to emphasize too is that while we're looking at history examples, these do not just apply to history. These can be done in all the social studies, geography, economics, political science, culture, whatever you want to do. It applies across the board. Performance tasks are an excellent opportunity to integrate the social studies as well. Now, extended writing and research papers, as we said, are examples of performance tasks. They require students to do just the same things as we see in the other performance tasks. They have to show what they know, what they understand, what they're able to do. And one of the key elements of quality research papers, as described in articles we have on our wiki, and we please encourage you to check out those articles, is the development of historical questions that must be answered. Teaching history has a wonderful overview with examples of how to craft quality research questions to complete this performance task, and let's take a quick look at that now. And we have this linked on our wiki, and just briefly looking at it, talk about why extended writing is so important. They talk about the process they've done. So these are in-class teachers, again, high school, but this applies K through 12 really, because we want our kids to be thinking historically as early as possible. I know my 4-year-old daughter thinks historically because she always remembers everything I said 5 weeks ago. So definitely taking part in her. So he talks about how they go through encouraging their students to consider historical questions and craft historical questions. They have links and handouts, for example, here on their page on developing historical questions. And remember that with every performance task we're looking at here, a question is going to be involved. Whether we're talking about a performance task in history, geography, economics, whether we're doing an exhibit, whether we're doing a writing assignment, whether we're doing a digital presentation, or so on. Right? Remember, a quality research paper is ultimately more than just saying, research this. It requires learning experiences just as much as other examples of performance tasks. And remember too, everybody does book reports, but it's more than just a simple book report. And like many deep historical projects or deep projects in the social studies, it addresses a question that may not have just one correct answer. Controversy can be a very difficult thing to talk about in the classroom. So here's an idea, let your students talk about it. All right? And this is definitely a good way to go about that. Obviously, within certain guidelines, you're going to be giving the students the rubric before they even begin their research. They'll can guide them and kind of questions that they should be crafting and so on. Extended writing and research papers are perhaps what we see as like the most traditional, I guess you could call them. But again, these are transferable all across, and you can have visuals in an extended writing opportunity. Whether we're talking about charts and graphs or we're talking about illustrations, you could have visuals in this extended writing opportunity, this research paper. Just as with the other examples we looked at, the emphasis might be visual, you're still going to have a writing element. In the writing opportunity, you might have some visual elements. And remember too that these performance tasks, these activities that they're doing, really thoroughly prepare students to succeed in whatever assessments they may be given at the end of a year. And so, looking at the rubric, again, we have the rubric available on our website. Nice thing about writing opportunities, research papers, is that you may not have to grade it yourself. This is a fantastic opportunity to collaborate with other subject areas. For example, perhaps your student is addressing a scientific question in their social studies project. Bring in a science teacher. Hey, ELA teacher can help you with the writing structure. Definitely comes into play. Fantastic, as we suggested, fantastic opportunity to collaborate across the school, across the curriculum. Which brings us to one of my favorites, digital presentations. Take a minute and take a look at the excerpt we have from Dubell up here. and we have it linked for you at the bottom. What he's essentially saying here is that technology essentially increases choice. Technology gives people power. And integrating technology into the activities that students are doing, the assessments that you're doing with your students, is one of the best and most effective ways for them to demonstrate 21st century skills, 21st century thinking and learning. And here's the key for us, don't forget our teacher evaluation instrument. Digital presentations provide you documented evidence of student work and student knowledge of that 21st century learning. And remember that for part of that evidence, it's not just you using the technology, it's the students using the technology. This is a perfect example for that to happen. All right? So, what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at a digital presentation. We watch about the first 5 minutes of it. Same deal as with the last one. We're going to play the video. Hopefully it comes through, and we apologize if it does not. But please spend 5 minutes on our wiki and view the legacy of Alice Paul, which is the second video, and think about the learning experiences that might be necessary for this to work in your classroom. We're going to come back to it, and we'll talk a little more about digital presentations. It's one of the better digital presentations I've seen. Now, we know digital presentations are, we'll call the new hotness. It seems like everybody is doing a digital presentation. But remember that they can take a number of forms. They can be like what we see at the video here, which is a multimedia recorded piece. And you saw the student also incorporating primary sources into their presentation, which is fantastic. Could be a quality PowerPoint, animation, book trailer, and book trailers are becoming very popular now. Documentaries, websites, some other form that ultimately shows that cut what students know, understand, or are able to do. So, if you could, share your reaction in the question box. Share reaction to the clip. What did you see the student who crafted that, what did you see that student demonstrating? And what learning experiences might be necessary for this to work in your classroom? All right. Let's see. Julie said future filmmaker, very professional, and that's certainly true too, which leads to the question, would students have to be exposed to this sort of filmmaking in your classroom? Could be done also. It's an interesting thing to think about. How to use the technology. Adam said how to use the technology. A real feel for early the arc of the story. That's very true. And in some ways, the arc of history, if you think about it. How about some historical thinking? Do you see historical thinking going on?
No, about another half hour or so.
In that piece.
All right. See you later.
Also, I was thinking about how to conduct an interview, and of course, copyright laws. And one thing that our class did was they just took a quick session on Windows Movie Maker, which would take care of the technology piece. But then there's various types of ways to make movies. In fact, I'll never forget, in 4th grade, my daughter blew me away with being able to create something like this. And it was actually my students who taught me how to create documentaries like this. So it is pretty astonishing what native technology people are able to do.
Julie, you asked, what do I mean by historical thinking? A lot of the comments I've been said so far emphasize that technology. But outside of the technology, where do we see the student demonstrating that they understood the topic? They understood the themes, the concepts. How was that demonstrated in there? You because we want them to, again, we don't want them to just do technology for technology's sake. If anybody has any thoughts on that? No problem. Julia, I was saying that we ultimately don't want, Julia, just to clarify, I had stepped away, we don't want them to focus on technology for technology's sake. And so how does this particular digital presentation demonstrate that it's not just technology for technology's sake? Where do we see the historical thinking going on that the student understands, has the cut, that they know, they understand, they're able to do?
One thing that jumps out at me for technology is she was actually able to interview experts. Now, without the use of technology, she wouldn't have been able to video and be able to put what we reference sometimes as talking heads all together like that, and be able to give that authentic. The voice over by the narrator shows clear understanding of the material and conveys emotional appreciation of what she is talking about. Beautiful, Christopher Chappelle, I hope I pronounced your last name properly. Awesome. Exactly.
Excellent points. And digital presentations are a wonderful tool. Okay, Julie, the connection between what made that incredible for the time and currently, that's great. Connecting then to now. You want your students to make those connections. That's brilliant. Connection between then and now. One of our goals, and this is a big thing in all of our standards, is connecting the then to the now. That ensures the relevance. That makes sure that the students can make those connections, and it's real to them. You know, the reason that you can vote is because of what this woman went through. You know, kids take some of these things for granted. This keeps them from taking it for granted. And certainly this is a student that recognizes that. And these digital presentations allow that to be seen. Excellent points. All right, now this is an example of the evaluation that you might see. Again, this is just one example. You could modify it however you like. Your own rubric, of course, doesn't need to look like this. We have examples of these rubrics online. Keep in mind, you may have different types of digital presentation rubrics depending on the type of digital presentation the student chooses. A PowerPoint presentation or a commercial is going to have a different rubric than one that is a video, or something along those lines. So you want to make sure you're crafting your digital rubrics to reflect the type of digital presentation your student's doing. Now, could you do a universal rubric for it? It's a possibility, but you need to be very specific and very clear about what you're looking for. Right? For example, on this one right here, this is actually out of economics, out of a media presentation on economics, so you can see that they've modified it to reflect consumer. So the student had to do a presentation relating to supply and demand, and consumers and producers and those sorts of things. So this rubric reflects that element. Right? It might be different for a different type of one.
Also, I love the idea of creating a commercial even for a historical time period when you have to actually sell something. That's the persuasive component. So I think that, you know, even though this is an econ, it doesn't need to just be part of econ to do like consumer focus. I think students could have a blast, and you also need Common Core persuasion, argumentative writing.
Great point, Ed. Now, one of the last things we're going to talk about is this idea of self-reflection and peer-to-peer reflection. This is so important. You want your students to think about what they're doing. And student self-reflection serves as an opportunity for writing, as well as a chance to think deeper about what's been learned and consider our own personal strengths and weaknesses. Remember, everything we do relating to this performance task, including reflection, should have some sort of rubric to guide work. So you can see here that even the self-reflection has a rubric to go with it. Now, you might want to modify the questions asked for your reflection, depending on your performance task, your class, and your goals, but the student really need to think about what they did. And while they may have heard, I need you to think about what you did quite a bit in their young lives, this is a positive way to hear that being directed at them. I love using self-reflections and peer-to-peer rubrics. I like with peer-to-peer rubrics and peer-to-peer reflections giving each other grades. And I found honestly that, particularly if the rubric is clear and strong, students will often be harsher on each other than I will be. And that's taken into account in their final grade. Students are going to hear from you, right? They hear from you all the time. But what do their peers think? That matters. Particularly in collaborative groups, really this sort of work reflection is important. It includes, this example includes peer-to-peer reflection on both the final performance task and on the work done within a group if that occurred. Certainly, you may not have a peer-to-peer rubric looking like this if it was an individual project. Perhaps their rubric is based on a presentation. You may choose to adjust the rubric based on what you're looking for in the peer-to-peer reflection. Now, the nice part about this sort of reflection is that students have to really think about, be able to describe their reasons for evaluating their peers. You can't just say, oh, I don't like you, I'm going to give you a 1. They have to be able to justify their grades. We have to justify the grades we give them. They need to be able to justify the grades they give each other. Now, this sort of thing takes practice and time, and also understanding that this shouldn't be a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of thing. Students should understand how to write quality feedback and why that quality feedback matters in the long run. It can only serve to improve their ultimate work. Now, let's talk about some ways to modify these sorts of tasks. You guys have really addressed a lot of this, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We touched on this throughout the presentation today. So let's just share any final thoughts you might have on how you might modify any of these for K-3 graders or a student with differing abilities and learning styles. And share your thoughts in the question box. Sure. Good. Julie points out that using evidence is an ELA, Common Core Standard. That's fantastic. Tied into that rubric there with the peer-to-peer reflection, and really throughout everything that they're doing. That's fantastic. Now, while you think, just some modifications that we might consider would involve leveling the rubrics based on ability or grade level. Another option might be to allow collaboration, or it might normally be an individual project. And of course, your traditional modifications based on IEP or 504 are also possible. Extended time, direct assistance, and so on. But ultimately, and Ann and I have talked about this a great deal, one of the nice things about this sort of approach is that in many cases, honestly, a great deal of modification to the task is not necessary. Now, the rubrics might need to be adjusted a little bit, but these examples of performance tasks work with almost all students. Now, are you going to do it as soon as they walk into your classroom? No. This is something that's going to take time over the course of the year. But honestly, even a kindergartner could do a digital presentation. For example, a child at that level might be asked to use a digital storytelling tool or program. Even something as simple as Paint to craft a story about themselves. And I know one of you guys mentioned that you had used a VoiceThread program as a digital presentation. Julie pointed out, ultimately, modifications involve going back to your generalization and what you want students to show, and ultimately being able to provide them choice, but with a consistency of expectations, and that's fantastic. Learning styles reflect the choice. Giving students choice. Now, might that be a little bit more work for you with different types of rubrics and so on? Certainly. But the quality of the work that the students are going to be doing is increased. And I know when I grade stuff, I really like to grade the good stuff. You're more likely to get good stuff when you have that student choice. Fantastic point, Julie. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Now, the last thing we're going to touch on is rubrics and why rubrics ultimately matter. And Ann's going to talk about that, and I'm going to take it to the page.
Okay, In terms of rubrics, one thing my experience has shown me is that sometimes they can be underutilized in the upper grades. And my experience has also granted me the privilege of seeing how different student products vary when they are not given the rubric ahead of time. And it's no fun when a student thinks they've rocked it and in fact, fails in comparison to their other classmates. So basically, we've supplied these sample rubrics for you to customize to your needs. I also highly recommend Rubistar in customizing. There's tons in that database there already created that you can customize or create from scratch. So just couldn't say enough that whether you're in kindergarten or you're teaching AP to seniors in high school, the use of rubrics is extremely helpful. It also helps in parent relations. The parents have a quick, easy, I love when my daughter brought home a rubric every time. It was in the presentation component in which she was scoring low, and she was shy, and I knew every time it was because of she needed to work on her public speaking, and that was consistent. And as a parent, I appreciated that communication. Also, for administrators, I posted all rubrics, and I recommend all posting of rubrics throughout classrooms. Post them alongside the presentations. It also ensures it's not that Crayola curriculum that people sometimes reference. So, the rubrics is also facilitating the means of starting with the end in mind. You've identified the expectation, it aligns to the generalization, and it facilitates that success in walking the students to get there.
And just building on what Ann said, as with everything else, rubric combined with a completed sample task will provide the best example for a student. I know I always try to keep some of the best final projects or performance tasks as models for my students, and as some of the weakest as well, to show them a non-example of how not to do a particular performance task. And it's great too when you run into your students and students come by for a visit 6-7 years later and they see their fantastic projects on the wall and say, yeah, you really showed me you learned something important, and that's just great. And again, builds those relationships with those students. Now, one last thing here with the rubrics, you can find it on our wiki under assessment info, where it has those fun 3 letters and a number of other materials that you might find useful. But if you scroll all the way down on the assessment info page, we have the rubrics here for performance tasks and extended writing, okay, which is also, of course, a performance task, but it's just a separate essay type rubric you might do in your classroom, right, rather than a particular research paper.
And just as a sidebar, that essay rubric was originally one that aligned to the Common Core and had a historical accuracy component added. So in doing interdisciplinary project performance tasks, that one is well liked by my ELA staff as well.
Now, one last thing to bring up is, I'm sure it's crossed your mind, is how these relate to MSL Common Exam rubrics. I hesitate to unlit the demon, but bringing that demon out. So let's talk about it briefly. All the rubrics presented here are pretty in-depth and far more detailed than is used to grade the Common Exam constructed responses. Remember that those constructed responses in the exam are not intended to be performance tasks. Students are not going to be doing performance tasks on the Common Exams. As such, the rubric being used for them is going to be less detailed. At the same time, the rubrics with these MSLs are general rubrics that leave a great deal open to interpretation on the part of the grader. This provides grading flexibility for the exams, particularly on the part of the 115 different LEAs where they're being used. For example, I know some counties have modified the rubrics that were provided through technical outreach for public schools, the TOPS agency. So while the rubrics here are certainly more in-depth and don't necessarily reflect what we'll see on an MSL, if the students can do these, the MSLs are cake, because they've demonstrated the conceptual thinking and learning throughout the year. And that is the goal. I shouldn't say that they will be cake. They should be cake. We can. That's what we're aiming for. Perhaps I was misspeak on my part. Now, any questions you guys have, we're more than happy to answer. And if you don't have any questions, we appreciate you joining us. And if you have questions you want to ask them now, please feel free to email us. But we'll leave it open for a minute. Here's a question right here. Yeah, Julie asked about comment on the constructive response items. Trying to grow our teachers' understanding of close reading, annotation, quick writes, and deeper understanding of text-dependent questions. That's fantastic. And I wish we had a more specific timeline for when those constructive response items will be posted. We've given our feedback on them. We're just ultimately, they're in the hands now of the person that needs to post them. And hopefully they will be up soon. Unfortunately, they are a bit out of us. But if you shoot us an email, we're more than happy to help you with however we can with perhaps example response items that we may be able to think of for you. Thank you again so much for it. And well, Julie said thanks. We're so glad you're able to give feedback. Well, that's one of the things we are able to do, fortunately. What they do with their feedback's another issue. So we really appreciate your being here. And any closing questions? Well, we'll hang around a bit, and if any questions come up, we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you working with you.